Nice. Well, cool. I think we should go ahead and get started then.
I agree. Do you want to go through? Well, I guess I'm sharing, so.
You got control, man. It's all you.
That's right. Welcome to the first pants optional episode of azPHP, socially distanced. Sort of brought to you by Pagely. We're not in Galvanize tonight, but
we're on your Zoom.
Yeah, we are using Pagely's Zoom. Very true. So, agenda, introductions, announcements, trivia, presentations, and I don't know. We'll see. We might just keep the Zoom going all night. Fill up that recording. Slack channel for people in the Valley, developers, whoever want to hang out virtually and chat and whatever. A lot of JavaScript people on there, but we forgive them, and we have our own channel. And join us because you have nothing better to do while you're quarantined, right? All right, so I believe from an email I got today, Galvanize is not going to allow any meetups there until the 1st of May. So next month's meetup will also be online, even if Pagely is back in the office at that point.
Yeah, we'll just play it by ear and say they'll all be online until they're not.
All right, so trivia, Jeremy, is this a new one?
I think so.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna do, if everyone opens the little participants thing and hits the raise hand, whoever I see with a hand up first can answer. I don't know how this works. Does everyone else have that button?
Josh has his hand raised.
No, very good.
Yeah, so you gotta scroll down to the bottom of the screen and the participants there, and then you can hit the raise hand.
Right.
But I think that number 8 is not an array function. I didn't cheat, so I'm not 100% sure.
There are more than one.
All right.
That one is correct. I saw Ray, and then I saw John, and then I saw Chris. So Ray, what do you think?
I'd like to say number 1.
That one is actually a PHP function.
Huh.
All right, I gotta look that one up. And no, I'll only do one guess.
John and Chris had guesses.
I think number 2 is not a function.
That's correct. And there is one more.
Number 8.
That was
Yeah, we got that one. Yeah, number 8 is
And number 4.
Number 4, yeah, right, John.
Number 4 is a real PHP function.
Yep, I've used that one many times.
Then array concat, is that the last one?
There you go.
All right.
Snuck in a MySQL on there. Next, I guess would be group concat from SQL, right?
Yeah, I'm going to pop over to the next slide.
Yep.
So they're highlighted. There we go.
I feel like union really should exist.
I agree.
So these are, I chose these 3 names because they are kind of like functions that do exist.
And they're not unusual to see those in like collection libraries and stuff.
Yeah. So array union is there's a union operator and there's array merge, and those are both kind of like union operations. Array concat, there's array combine, which would serve that purpose, and array pluck you can use. The real function you can use to do a pluck is the array column function. You can do all three of those things, even though those functions themselves don't exist.
Cool. Good one. All right, we got.
I try to keep them tricky.
Yep. So I have a presentation tonight, but does anyone else have something to present tonight? No? Really? You're all quarantined. You have no excuses.
Does everyone have work right now?
Yes.
What are you
Lots
doing
of it.
after work?
More work?
Don't answer that. Never mind.
If anyone needs help finding work, let us know, because everyone needs a job right now. It's interesting times.
Yes, it is. All right. I guess I will present then if nobody else has anything. It's going to be relatively short, and the majority of it is going to be going through some code. Back here, Zoom. Share. Do this one. Okay. All right. So I'll be doing a little presentation on some different dependency injection containers. So originally, I was going to do a presentation on creating a micro framework. And I started down that road, and I started out with one DI container, and I almost instantly hated it. So I tried another one, and I hated that one, and so on. So I decided I'm going to do a presentation on dependency injection containers. Also known as IOC, or inversion of control containers, which is also the I in solid. So, as you know, DI means dependency injection. In the past, these have been confused with service locators like Pimple. And a lot of containers are still used as service locators. The majority of them, you just end up creating a bunch of factories, or you new up instances of all your services yourself and just shove them in a blob. And whether or not you use them, they're eating up memory and it's a waste. So the idea is dependency injection. A good one will do most of that work for you. It will create stuff. So yeah, the four main things I want from a dependency injection container: auto wiring, sharing, aliasing, and not be a pain in the ass. So what is auto wiring? I pretty much already said this. A good dependency injection container will automatically create a new instance of a class when needed. And as long as it supports auto wiring, it will introspect the constructor of said class and automatically create new instances of any required parameters. In PHP, this is usually done by using reflection classes. I'm not sure if there would be another way to do it, but that's the way I've seen. And our container should also be able to build a well-structured class for us with zero configuration. In other words, I have a class which has another concrete class in its constructor, and that's it. I should be able to ask for an instance of that top level class, and it should be able to build that thing for me, including its dependency. So sharing. A lot of times when you have a relatively large system application, you end up having some services you want shared, such as an entity manager, logger, event manager, pretty much anything you might have as a dependency of multiple services that as your API call or CLI or whatever, as it goes through all this flow, if you need your logger multiple times or your entity manager multiple times, you don't want to have to create a new instance of that. That would be silly. Especially since, you know, a lot of those things, they end up keeping a lot of state internally. So creating a new instance of those probably be messy. So yeah, a lot of DI containers by default, every time you ask for something, it will create a new instance of whatever you ask for. But you should be able to configure each item separately to be shared. And I've also seen one dependency injection container which allows you to specify anything as shared. Not sure what to think about that idea. It's probably okay, but you know, it could go either way. All right, aliasing. So a lot of us have been taught to code to interfaces, and I do that a lot. So you have a constructor that depends on an interface. You might use the PSR interfaces like the logger interface as part of your constructor. So your DI container will look at that and say, I can't new up an instance of an interface, neither can you, but we want to be able to say anytime we see logger interface as a dependency, we want to use some other class instead, which would implement that interface. So did I say all that? Yes. Right. So yeah, don't be a pain in the ass. Configuration should be relatively simple for a dependency injection container, in my opinion. You shouldn't have to, you know, read a ton of documentation. You should be able to do maybe a couple of little callable methods just to inject some configuration into your container or container builder or whatever it is. So yeah, creating micro framework in this day and age should not be difficult. And unfortunately, I found that not really to be the case. Because the framework normally is just dependency injection, some bootstrap and glue, a dispatcher, middleware, and that's pretty much it. At that point, you just add whatever you need. And again, that the dispatcher and middleware, that would be only if you're doing API endpoints. Guess you could probably do middleware for CLI stuff, but I don't know. I don't think I would. But yeah, so that's all the pieces of a micro framework. If you're using more than that, you may not actually need it. So if you can't even get past bootstrapping your dependency injection container without trying to hack around it, then the container is obviously lacking in functionality. So we'll go over a few of these.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by bootstrapping real quick?
Oh, yeah. So like essentially configuring your DI container to get something out of it. So in this case, this is kind of the MVP of what we want to do. We want a class that has a interface in the constructor and also a string. I guess that's another thing I should have done a slide on, is defining primitives, because your DI container isn't going to know what API key is here. So you are going to have to define that somehow, either as pulling in an environment variable, constant, some other way of doing it, or kind of delegating, or not delegating. Delegating to a factory method or something like that if you absolutely need to. My opinion is if you're having to do a factory method, then maybe look at your constructor, because maybe it's not as well put together as you think. So we have our thing class here, interface and a string. We create our dependency injection down here. I'm just going to use very kind of standard classes for every DI container that I use, so I can kind of reuse the same code everywhere. And then I want to try and get an instance of my thing class out of it. So I couldn't fit it on here, but the thing class will also have a simple run method to log something and to return the API key. And that's what we're going to use for testing. So any questions on that? No? Okay. So yeah, these are the ones I have gone through. PHP DI was the one I started with. I tried League, the PHP League container after that. Was it yesterday? Yesterday, someone mentioned on the AZDevs Slack that I should try the Symfony container. So I tried that one. And the one I'm currently using now in the framework that we use is called Auren, that no one has heard of, but it actually works for me. So I'll just get to some code. Hold on a second.
I have a quick question about the different ones that you tried. I mean, I don't think any of them support it, but in your API key example, wouldn't it be possible to like use reflect? I mean, it's maybe kind of dangerous, but maybe use reflection and look at the variable name and like tie that with like an.
I mean, just based off of the name.
Explicitly set the parameters, but that would be kind of cool if one of those did support something like that.
Yeah, most of them kind of do, but well, supposedly do. But it would be specific to the thing class. So you would define the API key parameter of the thing class is going to map to this. Because you don't want like anything with a parameter called API key to get one API key. You might be having some sort of billing third-party thing. You might have some sort of database third-party thing, and they all might have a parameter called API key.
I guess if your variable names across all of your classes were unique enough.
Yeah, I guess like, yeah, you'd have one called Stripe API key or whatever, but that would be kind of neat because, I mean, it saves, I guess, a little bit of composure having to, composition, I mean, having to write all of that up.
Right.
One thing I've done in the past, if I wanted to do that, is I just use a class with a single constant on it to pass something around like that, and then you can still use type hidden.
That's a really good idea. Okay, I see what you mean. Like maybe create like a value object that
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So if definitely if the code is yours or you feel like extending and or doing a wrapper around something, you can definitely use a value object class. And I actually do that quite a bit in our framework. So yeah, let's look. So I have this little interface here I'm using for all of the different bootstraps. I have a constants class here to store my API key for now. Like again, you could be pulling it from environment. However, I'm just using a constant here for the moment. Here's my thing class, our constructor, API key, and later on I actually added a entity manager class just to have some extra thing that we don't have any configuration for. And it's just an empty class. It would just new up an empty object essentially for filling out the constructor. Let's see. All right, so, and of course I install PHP unit because we need to actually test these things. All right, so PHP DI. Here's our bootstrap. Yeah, I'm not going to go through the documentation for all these DI containers. I'll let you all do that yourselves. I think I have, yeah, I have a list of all the sites for all the containers. I'll post my slides after the presentation here. But yeah, so our bootstrapper, we're using the D. PHP DI stuff here. And prepare is just going to take a bunch of arrays, if I remember right. So let's look at our test here. Most of these tests are going to look relatively similar. So our configs is just an array. So we have an array to alias our logger interface. PHP DI has a bunch of namespaced functions that they use, which is kind of weird, but I guess it's fine. It was either that or probably creating static methods on a class. So either way. So this is how aliasing works in PHP DI, and I want to alias logger interface to just a standard test logger class that comes with the PSR stuff. In my thing class, we want to auto wire everything in it, but also use in the constructor have the API key parameter end up with our constant. So we have that. We run our configs through prepare. We boot, which should return a container, and then we'll create a thing, assert that the thing is actually a thing. And since I made the logger property on this thing public, we'll just check to see if it's actually our test logger, so which would mean it aliased correctly. And actually did the API key thing to return it later on, and I forgot to add that into the tests. But most of the time, we don't even get that far. So let me run this test. Tests. Oh yeah, so yeah, after digging in through the documentation, I found out that there's no way to share anything in PHP DI. And granted, I didn't dig for very long. I dug for maybe 5-10 minutes and couldn't find anything. So PHP DI has failed to me. If anyone knows how to share anything in it, let me know now. Let's try and fix this thing.
I mean, you can use an inline factory
I didn't want to have to do factories.
and a global variable.
Where
I don't see any other option.
Right. Now, I'll ask on the AZ devs things after this. Maybe someone else knows.
what about I was gonna say you could just add it to the container after the fact, but you're trying to instantiate the container here, right? I'm trying
Right.
to do, yeah, okay.
So instantiating the container worked fine, but as soon as I tried to make well, it made the thing, but the logger, so after I get the thing down here, I also want to get the logger, which should be shared. And then I want to make sure that it actually ended up logging.
Yeah, I mean, it really looks like the only way in this framework is to use a closure factory.
Right. I mean, doable, but I kind of prefer the container to handle that for me.
Show us what you mean in one of the other ones so we can see these.
All right.
Yeah.
No, I think we'll see that in the league one here. So let's look at the league bootstrap real quick. Again, we're using the league stuff now, league container. The league container for configurations, we just give it a bunch of callbacks that end up taking the container as a parameter, and then each callback will work on the container itself to do configuration. So let's see, where was I? There we go. So again, so here are our configuration callbacks. And the first one is going to, it's called add in league, but it takes an identifier, which may or may not mean a class name or something to link to a constructor. This is another issue with using things as service locators. Like a lot of the times you'll see in frameworks just like, give me DB. What is DB? Or give me logger. Give me, I don't know, whatever, or, crazy static facade thing. So we have no idea what we're actually getting back. I prefer my container to actually be linked. Like I want to ask for an instance of a class or an interface, and I want to get that back. I don't want to say, some arbitrary string. It should be directly linked to the code that you're creating an instance of. My opinion. I don't know. So, and we want to specify our API key for a thing. So supposedly we have to add the thing and then set the arguments for it. So it's kind of a chained fluent interface here. So in our thing, we're at the first argument is the logger, which unfortunately there's no way to specify a named argument. So we kind of have to go through each thing in order to pretty much do the constructor ourselves. So our logger interface, and then we have our API key. One would hope that the auto wiring would fill out anything else. And we'll see here in a moment if it does. So we got to prepare, boot. This is all pretty much the same as previously. There's a get method instead of make, but the rest of the test is the same. And too few arguments for thing. So it didn't auto wire the last argument. So what happens? An argument, what's it called? Entity manager. Will that work? Argument 3 must be an instant. Why is it giving it a string? Because apparently I have to add every single thing I want to use to the container. Let's see, will that work? All right, hey, that worked.
Yeah, so you can do almost that exact same thing with the PHP DI container, add something to the container,
Right.
and then it'll be able to auto.
At that point, you're kind of manually doing a bunch of auto wiring yourself.
Yeah, I get it, right.
And like this, why should I have to tell my container about that? Like, I don't want to have to add every single class that I'm going to use. It's a waste of my time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty ugly pattern where you see yourself saying class name equals class name.
Yeah, yeah, it's silly.
Where are you? Can you go up to the top where you're instantiating it?
Where at?
Or where are you instantiating the container?
Oh, where I boot it? Or what? Do you want me to go back to the bootstrap?
Yeah, maybe. Let me see the bootstrap.
And there's not a whole lot to that. That's just
Okay, so there is a if you do there's a reflection container you can add as a delegate to this that should enable more auto wiring.
Oh.
So on the next line after that, do this container delegate and then new reflection container. See if it imports that for you. There it is. And that should actually hopefully set up more auto wiring.
Okay.
I've actually used this one before. I haven't used PHP DI.
Let's see if that works. Nope. Still goes back to having to do everything.
Yeah, it probably only helps you if you don't specify anything.
Right.
Yeah.
But you might have been able to get rid of the line above,
Right.
line 29.
Okay. Yep. So that gets rid of that.
So a little bit closer.
A little bit closer. And it did do sharing, but it might be sharing by default. Because we didn't actually, oh yes, we did specify that it's shared over here.
How does it know where to get those classes from? Just your
Auto loading.
composer? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, well, that's cool. Good to know. So we can definitely go back to League at some point. All right, so Symfony. Or does anyone have any more questions or want me to try and change anything else in here?
One of the interesting things of looking at the League documentation is that I can't find that reflection container documented anywhere.
Right, like, why isn't that the default?
But yeah, I think you might actually be able to do a similar trick to only define some of the properties too, but that just seems really complicated to have to learn.
Yep.
Well, I found the documentation for League about enabling auto wiring.
Yeah, they truncate their sidebar menu, and all the helpful links are in this little more link on docs for some reason. But there's an auto wiring page.
Yeah. That should be another thing. Don't make your documentation awful.
It used to be better than this. I don't know what they. I don't know why they changed it.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to Symfony. Had high hopes. So Symfony uses a container builder, which actually ends up being the container. So that makes a lot of sense. But it does the same thing. You just give it a bunch of callbacks. So should be relatively similar. So let's look at our test. So here's our setup. We're setting an alias for our test logger. We're specifying that we should auto wire our thing class. Again, it's using arbitrary strings, but then we have to give it a class name. And this took me a while to find in documentation. There is a set argument method, but it is in their service manager code, but it's still on the dependency injection builder container. And it looks like it should work right. Like the parameters make sense, key and value. So I would think, okay, I'm auto wiring this thing class and I'm setting the API key parameter as this value. Makes sense to me. Okay, so same prepare, boot, same as before. All right, let's run it. Boy. Argument 1 passed to construct must be an instance of logger, a string given, which means after a little debugging, it's actually trying to give our API key as the first constructor argument for thing, which means this thing pretty much blew away any auto wiring that it would have done and is assuming that this is the first parameter. Like I've tried other, like the documentation did weird things like putting a $sign in there that made zero difference. So I would have to end up doing the same thing, doing manual wiring. A lot of the better configuration is done through using their service manager stuff, which I just want a DI container. I don't want all that service locator insanity.
When you actually use this in Symfony, at least in the version that I'm familiar with, you actually configure everything with YAML, which is wild.
Right. And yeah, I don't want to have to do that either. I don't want to have to code by configuration.
That was a weird thing I remember seeing, and I just hated that, having to do it all in YAML.
XML's an option too.
All right. Any questions about Symfony stuff?
I think possibly you can do what you want to do, but you have to create a class, a service definition object for each class that needs a parameter.
So I'm creating classes to create my classes, YoDog.
It's pretty complex.
pretty
Yeah.
classy.
Ah, I like it. I'll allow it.
Kick him.
All right, let's look at R and the little DI container that could. So again, like nobody's ever heard of this. I had never heard of it until Josh found it as part
I've
of
heard of it, but I haven't used it.
right? So it uses a class called injector. Weird. What does that actually do? And our bootstrap is pretty similar to what we've seen before. Let's look in our test. So we're going to alias our logger interface. And we are going to, it's a nice fluent chained interface. So we then say we want to also share our logger interface. It already knows that it's going to be alias to this test logger. It combines all that configuration. So it knows I'm going to share this thing.
Does
No matter
share
where.
basically mean singleton? Is that what we're getting at here?
Essentially, yes.
Okay,
Like,
just
so
making sure.
if logger interface is used in multiple classes for construction, it's going to use the same object. It's not going to create a new instance of it. So then I want to specify the API key because that's the only thing that I actually need to configure for this class. And the way we do that with RN is we use the parameter key, which is API key, but we have a colon in front of it. And if I were to not use a colon, that would mean what would be on the right side over here would be a class name, which would mean new up a new class to use for this parameter. But with the colon, that means I am giving the actual value here. So any questions on that? So defining, we just give the class name and array of configuration. That's it. And then the rest of our test as usual. And it works. That's all it took.
Scroll up again.
Looking at the docs, you could have also define named parameters globally, though that's probably a bad idea, but you can if you want to.
Yeah, that sounds a little scary to me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Cool. Any questions? Thoughts?
What about if you want to instantiate multiple instances of the same one? Like, if you want two things, like, can you name them, or would you have to subclass them, or?
No, like you want two separate instances of something, like our thing class. Like
Yeah.
if I asked for a second instance of thing, I would get a new one at this point. So
Yeah, the logger is shared because you explicitly told it to share
Right.
that, but thing is not, right?
correct, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like the only thing that's relatively hard is if you want different configurations for the same class and you want to define them globally.
Do you remember? Does anyone remember the standard lib method for getting a hash of an object?
SPL object hash?
Yeah, there it is. Thanks, autocomplete. And Josh. So thing one and thing two should not be equal. There we go. We can also do, let's see, we got our logger here. Let's see. We're good. So we know for sure that those loggers are the same exact object. Did that answer your question?
You could have also just done assert same.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I like the way that works. This is a cool. I've never heard of it, but they should start replacing Symfony's DI container with this.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you'd have to convince Fabian.
Right. So yeah, for if I do that other presentation on doing micro frameworks, I'm definitely going to be using this and not one of the other ones. Questions, comments? Who else is presenting?
I feel like, no, I was just gonna say, I feel like this is exactly how PHP DI is supposed to work, but
Yes, I agree. Like, I've heard so many, like, PHP DI is great. It does all this stuff. It's blah, blah, blah. It didn't work for me out of the box.
I'm messing around with it real quick.
And also, Auron's documentation is a one-page README on the repo. Like, it doesn't have a website itself. So there's no, like, searching through multiple pages of documentation. Symfony's DI container or DI component should have all been documented on one page, but it's not. It's like spread through its crazy service manager stuff, which apparently only works on their service manager. Yeah, that's all I got.
So this is more of just a general question, but at what point, like, what's the question you need to answer before you say, aha, I'll use Aron or I'll use dependency injection, like, as a solution?
What, like the list of requirements, or
just like if you have code and you are missing some feature or to code faster, what's the problem it solves?
like pretty much everything I did here.
Okay.
If it doesn't have all of the requirements, let me reshare this.
I'd say there's some people that like auto wiring and some people that don't too.
I don't know why you would not love auto wiring.
Because reflection is slow.
No, it's not. Like, I
Arun
would
has
expected it to be
reflection caching as well that you can turn on.
right. Exactly. So,
But Oscar, if your question was why would you use DI in the first place?
Yeah.
The answer is use it an auto wiring one for a little bit and you'll just see like
and then go back to the way you were doing things before and building everything yourself and crying.
like it is super common to just, oh, I need another dependency to a class and it's somewhere deep down in the chain and use 20 places. And you can just add another parameter to the constructor and it works.
Yep.
Where if you're not using a DR container, an hour later, you finally get to add that dependency you needed. It just really makes, you no longer feel like you need to take like these hacky solutions and have facade classes and static methods everywhere to get around the fact you need access to one helper method on a class.
Yep.
Or feel like a class needs to have 40 methods because it's too hard to add a second one. It just removes all of those hassles from your code. And so it's much easier to write good code.
Or giving the actual container as a constructor method to things and doing those kind of horrible things. Which granted, we've all probably done at one time. We've all given the service locator to our classes for initialization.
Hey, if you inject the whole world, you have the whole world.
Right.
Out of memory.
Does make things a little hard to test.
Yep. All right.
Hey,
Well-
Gordon, I just sent you another container.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
You should try that one out.
Yeah. That's the one from Moo, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It doesn't do auto wiring. I'll give you that.
it is true.
But it does do sharing by default.
What's the repo for that?
Oh, Jeremy Maya MU. Wait, no, that's not spelled right.
Of course, it's not.
Close. Switch the Maya and the Mia.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Moo. Boom. There's framework.
An entire CodeIgniter like MVC framework.
Oh,
With-
CodeIgniter is much worse than this.
Absolutely no guardrails whatsoever.
I mean, I feel like with 2 more lines or so, you could probably add auto wiring.
Do it.
So it just pulls in things from Stack Overflow. All right.
But yeah, check out the README. The syntax is nice.
This is true. I mean, there's not much to it. You just give it a route and a callback.
There's the dependency injection right there with the log stuff.
Right?
Yeah, that's everything you hate. That is that's everything you hate in a one where it's all aliases and all factories.
Factories everywhere. Yeah, I don't know if it's awesome or sad that there's way more documentation than there is code. All right. Seriously, who else is presenting?
I don't know, what time is it?
I don't know.
I
8
don't know if
o'clock.
anyone else had anything planned. I don't know if anyone thought of anything.
All right. Well, that's okay. Let the hangout afterwards begin.